Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Babbling Idiots. In current events, Cruz recently said that Carly Fiorina would be his VP in the upcoming election if he gets the nomination, of course.
I don't have much to say about it. I I haven't put much thought into it. I think she's less insane than Cruz, but that doesn't make me want to vote for him anymore.
I think he's just doing it to try to get the
The
women's vote
woman's
and
vote.
such. Yeah.
But people are saying it's like uh, one of the most hated politicians having one of the most hated CEOs as his running mate, so that's not going to go very well.
Yeah, and talking about how Cruz is hated, Boehner, who was previously Speaker of the House, came out against him like very harshly.
You know
He
what he
he was
said?
Yeah, he was calling him like
He said he
Satan
was
basically.
he was Lucifer in the flesh. That's like a direct quote.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know where that came from. Maybe it's like maybe Boehner has some like bad experience with Cruz, like personally. I don't know exactly what happened. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't either. It just came out of nowhere,
Mhm.
but
But then also talking about running mates, I know you wanted to bring up that it's not looking very good for Bernie right now. Like not like he's completely done, but Hillary is looking for running mates now, and I've actually seen because I follow her on Facebook. She like all her ads and videos now are all targeted towards Trump, so she's shifting her attention towards uh like taking dumps on Trump. Uh, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that just shows that Hillary basically feels like she's clenched the win for the Democratic primary.
Hmm.
Um,
And she kind of rightly feels that way, but it's not done. But I'm starting to not feel so great about it.
I mean, she's only 200 delegates away. She only needs a couple more
Hmm.
states or
Hmm.
California.
Something important to bring up about Hillary. I think recently I've been thinking I might have decided to be Bernie or bust because before I was like, I'm gonna have to vote for Hillary because she's better than Trump. I don't like either of them. But recently I was thinking how uh, there are the people that choose not to vote because for a couple of reasons they just don't pay attention, and then there's some people that realize, oh, I don't really know enough about politics, so I don't think I should vote. Um, but I think actively choosing to not vote is a vote in itself, and it's exercising your speech of voting in itself. So by actively not voting for Hillary, I want to make the statement that I don't agree with the way the Democratic Party runs things. So that's kind of why I've changed um, kind of the philosophy because there's so much. There's like two sides of Bernie supporters right now: those that are going to vote for Hillary because she's better than Trump, and those that don't want to vote for her because of what the DNC is doing.
Um, I've heard this saying though that a vote, like not voting, I mean, is a vote for the candidate who is in the lead,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's why I might end up voting for Hillary if she wins the primaries, just because if Trump is in the lead, then not voting is essentially like voting for Trump.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've thought about that. I know once this happens, like if Trump becomes president, all the Hillary supporters are going to blame Bernie supporters for not voting, and um, it's like I don't I don't want to be blamed. Then essentially, in effect, everything horrible that Trump does is going to be blamed on Bernie supporters instead of the people that actually voted for him. I don't want you to blame us for the things Trump does because the left needs to understand that Trump isn't a creation of the right. He's a creation of the left. He's the left created Trump. The left is doing a bunch of crazy things that we've talked about, and I just want to talk about more. Pretty much every time I want to talk about the regressive left, even though I'm a left on the left, I spend all my time talking about the left. If we weren't so insane, the left, and generally speaking, we wouldn't have crazy people like Trump running for president because he's an embodiment of the right being fed up with the policing and some extreme people on the left doing what they do, which is the regressive left that we talk about.
That reminds me of something. Recently I was reading this thing about how third parties they hurt the Democratic Party more than they hurt the Republican Party,
Mhm.
because they take away more votes from the Democratic Party than the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And that just got me thinking about how you said previously that the reason that the Republican Party has been winning the presidency so much is because of how they give an emotional argument about things. But I mean, that's just another factor. So it's just interesting to think of how many factors can go into who wins an election, and that's going to be a factor in this upcoming election, because even if Hillary wins the Democratic primary, Bernie has repeatedly said that he's still going to run for president on the independent ticket. So that'll take away votes for Hillary and give the edge to whoever's voting on the Republican ticket. So that's worrisome.
Yeah, we'll see how it all works out. It's kind of messy because you do one thing and there's a good reason to do it, but then there's this kind of opposite side to it. If I vote for Hillary, then I'm approving. A vote is in a sense an approval, and even though everyone says how their vote is not worth a whole lot because so many people vote, they're not worth a whole lot. But I view my vote as valuable, and I think everyone should, because I'm saying I approve of that person. So I could, if I vote for Hillary, it's saying essentially the way I would see it is I don't want Trump to be president, but the way the vote is seen by a lot of people is I approve of that person, and I don't want that. I don't want, maybe that doesn't make sense. I don't want to be misrepresentative of who I'm supporting. Like, if Hillary wins in a landslide, which she probably won't, it might be pretty close. If she won in a landslide, she'd be like, look at all these people that like me, even though she's one of the most hated politicians right now. She'd have to realize that a lot of people voted for her just because the other side was so it wasn't palatable.
Yeah, and that just got me thinking about how it would be interesting to incorporate in our system an option to abstain from voting for either candidate, and then maybe if that got enough votes for, like, if that got a plurality of votes, then the whole election would be thrown out and it would have to be redone with new people.
Oh my god, that would take so long though.
That might take so long, but
it's an interesting idea.
It is, yeah. There would have to be some check on it essentially, so that it doesn't just go on like that forever. But yeah.
It would be interesting if like they just had a thing where you could say I don't support either of these candidates.
Yeah.
So that the people that like I vote, I'm engaged in politics, I want to have a say. So it would be cool if they made it somehow so that you could still vote but say that I don't approve of any of these people. I think that would be a really interesting thing.
Yeah, but like the reason that I said that it should be like it should just throw out the whole election is because if you do that and it doesn't matter, then no one will do it, you know.
It would be so tough to get a majority though, like
yeah, that's why I said plurality.
Yeah, you'd have to have like Hitler going against Mao to have people like agree that these people wouldn't be good for the country.
Yeah.
But then you have something to say.
I just think it goes against the whole like when the country was being founded, everyone knows that the Federalist Papers were all like, "Oh, factions are bad for the country." And parties are one of the biggest examples of factions. So it's just interesting to me how our system is kind of set up to support having a two-party system, because I mean, for example, if we had a plurality necessary to win the presidency, and countries do have this, so it's not like some crazy thing, but it would allow a lot of area for third parties to exist, because they wouldn't need to get 51% of the vote. They would only need to get more than everyone else. But at the same time, it's like, hey, is this actually democratic? Because look at all those people that their vote doesn't really count at this point. So that's why I've always thought that the best voting method is the alternative vote, just because it makes it so that your vote has to count at a certain point, which is, I think, the most democratic thing.
Well, we'll see how it all plays out. We don't have to make that choice just yet because it's not over on both sides.
Yeah.
But in other news, recently, our governor, Terry McAuliffe, which, as a side note, I think everyone should know who their governor, their senators, and their congressman is. Our governor is Terry McAuliffe. Our senators are Mark Warner and Tim Kaine. My congresswoman in the 10th district is Barbara Comstock, and yours is Jerry Connolly in the 11th district. And by the way, if you ever looked at the district maps, like the reason why people in our school, it was like you were either in the 10th or 11th, this is because it's very gerrymandered.
Yeah.
Which is something we should talk about another time. But Terry McAuliffe recently issued an executive order to re-give, I don't know what the right word is right now. What?
I think it's redistricting.
He's giving voting rights back to 200,000 felons.
Oh, never mind.
So,
I thought you were talking about something else.
Oh no, not gerrymandering. Like he's giving voting rights back to 200,000 felons, which my initial reaction, I haven't looked into it enough, so don't take what I'm saying as an exact representation of my views. But I see that as a good thing, because once you've paid for your crime and you go back into society and you become a productive member again, then you should be given your right to vote back. Now, of course, if you go back into prison, then there should be some time until you get your voting rights back. That's just an initial thought. I haven't looked into it far enough, but I think that's something important to bring up because it's in our state and our governor did that.
That's interesting, though, because I feel like most felons would be liberal, or they would vote along Democratic lines.
Yeah, and that's the argument. That's why he had to do an executive order, because our Congress in Virginia's Republican majority. So because a lot of people say, and that's a pretty broad statement to make, that most people that commit crimes are Democrats. But I know what you're saying, because they're overwhelmingly minorities.
Yeah.
And so it's seen as when Republicans try to keep voting rights away from felons and everything, it's seen as like, oh, they're trying to silence Democratic voters. And that makes sense. There's a good reason for that, because they're overwhelmingly minorities, which just goes to a whole nother issue, is why are prisoners in this country overwhelmingly minorities? So that just goes into a whole nother issue.
And it's connected to something we've talked about before, is the whole like voter ID thing.
Yeah.
You know how the real reason behind people wanting or not wanting voter ID is because it would give, basically, if voter IDs were required, it would help the Republicans, unless voter IDs were distributed to everyone, and then it would help the Democrats, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting just because a lot of this stuff has nothing to do with rights for people. It's just the parties trying to get votes for themselves, essentially.
Mm-hmm. But I like that idea of gerrymandering being brought up. We should talk about that another time, because I like having a certain amount of time at the start where we just talk about like hard politics stuff, and then we can get into the fun stuff where we just complain about stuff. So I want to talk about feminism today. One of the branches of the regressive left that I love bashing. And so I discovered a new hero recently of my regressive left critics. Her name's Christina Hoff Sommers, and I don't remember where I exactly found her, but she's been on Joe Rogan Experience, the Rubin Report, a bunch of the podcasts I like to listen to. And she's a Democrat, so she's on the left, and she's a huge critic of feminism. So I was listening to her on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I was really interested in a lot of what she had to say. A lot of it was really interesting. But basically, to go into feminism after this, right now I have a paper for English. I have to write about a play called Mammoth, which is it's based on the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas case. So I know we've talked a little bit before about like rape on college campuses. And so in feminism, there's this, by the way, you've probably heard right now, the number 1 out of every 5 women have been raped on college campuses.
I heard sexually assaulted, not
Sexually
raped.
assaulted. But that's a complete and like Christina Summers is one of these feminists. She kind of debunks some of these feminist ideas, and that's one of the big ones. Like it's right below on the list of like feminist myths, the gender wage gap, and then 1 in 5 on college campuses. And where that comes from is, and it's not that sexual harassment isn't a problem in college campuses. Where that has come from is a poor sample, not a representative sample. And it's essentially because you can't just directly ask someone, have you been sexually harassed? So they have to ask all these vague questions that go around it. So one of the questions they ask where they derive this from is, have you ever gotten drunk and then had sex and then regretted it later? And so anyone that said yes, they say that person's been sexually harassed.
Oh
So-
no.
So then, and the scary thing is all these feminist myths come from studies like this that have huge flaws in them, and academics and economists, they debunk these flaws, but feminists and people in gender studies hold on to them. So there was reports by actual government agencies show closer to 1 in 40, 1 in 50. That's way too many, but and it's still a huge problem that needs to be addressed. But you don't help anybody when you have false numbers.
I don't remember what it's called, but there's this psychological thing where essentially once you're like taught one thing, it's very hard for you to stop believing that essentially. So that's the issue with all this, is that once people hear this one fact that 1 in 5 women are sexually harassed on college campuses, then it's really hard to stop them from believing that. And it's just, I think that's a problem with a lot of statistics, and not even just in feminism, although feminism is a really big one for this kind of thing.
Yeah.
That it just affects a lot of arguments in this sort of thing. And I mean, obviously the feminists aren't going to be like, oh dang, we were wrong. Like at most they just won't acknowledge anything about it, So it helps them, but it hurts the legitimacy of their claims and stuff. And it's a problem with regressive feminism because no one's going to take them seriously if they're just basically lying about all this.
And here's one of the things about, I know we've talked before about, whether it's on this podcast or just one-on-one, about how like women are taken more seriously in rape cases. So a woman can accuse a man of rape and that guy's life is destroyed whether it happened or not. And there's all sorts of problems with that. I'm not even going to elaborate. There's just been so many cases, and cases where there's consensual sex between two drunk people and then the guy's the one that was the rapist. And there are actually people that are arguing that like both people can be raping each other at the same time.
I don't understand that.
That doesn't make sense. But the thing is, when you say that like that guy sexually harassed her even though they were both consenting adults while they were drunk, you're essentially saying that you're responsible. Like we accept that being drunk doesn't take away the responsibility of anything. If you get drunk and drive your car and kill somebody, you're responsible for that.
That's my favorite analogy for this whole thing.
Yeah, you get drunk and you shoot your friend because you think it would be funny, which has happened before. There's like cases where the people get drunk and they're like, dude, I'm gonna stand over there, why don't you just shoot that gun at me? and someone gets killed. You're responsible for that.
I feel bad for laughing now.
No, there was a thing on MythBusters a while ago where 2 drunk guys like loaded a shotgun with cigarette butts, and the cigarette butts killed the guy. I don't remember whether it was confirmed. But yeah, so one of the things that I think is a root problem in like these extreme forms of feminism is they make statements that fit. They're so contradictory in the way their narrative is. Everything is done to fit their narrative. So when you say, oh, that girl was responsible because she got drunk, well, it's like, oh, she was drunk, so she could have been taken advantage of, which can happen, but she consented usually in these cases. So it's like, oh well, they don't want to hold a woman responsible for getting drunk. It's like, you didn't have to drink, but they're always saying, oh, but she was probably coerced into it, which a lot of times she wasn't. It was consensual. A lot of times, the guy being accused will have texts from the girl saying like, "Come over,
Yeah.
I'm drinking, I wanna have sex," but they still like think that the girl was sexually harassed. So, if you're saying if you're refuting the belief that she was in control of what she was doing, you're essentially saying that women have no choice and women are weak. But that goes completely counter to your idea that women are so strong, and there's such a, it's so disjointed as to whether you believe women are strong or weak. Like another example, if a woman that's a stranger comes up to you and hits you, because like you're both kind of arguing with each other, and then you hit her back, you're seen as the bad guy for hitting her, and it's because women are weak, they're allowed to hit men. But you saying women are weak so they should be protected is completely contradictory to you saying that women are strong and are equal to men, and you have to choose one. You can't choose both.
And that's the thing. It's a trend I've noticed a lot in modern society, is that people just say things that will help their current situation without having like a real belief that they're sticking to.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
there's no principle.
exactly. So I'm going to use feminism as an example because this is what we're talking about right now. But when you say you're feminists, you have to believe that women are strong and equal to men at all times. And if you're saying that when a man is drunk and a woman is drunk and they have sex and they both consent, the man is responsible for what's happening, then you're saying that the woman is below him. And it's not just feminism either. It's like a bigger problem that's going on in our society. And I think part of it is this issue with people believing that morals are relative.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like people believe that that so many different things are relative right now that I think it's just starting to go too far.
Yeah.
Like, I can understand sexuality being relative, and to a certain point I can even understand gender being relative, but people are starting to push relativity too far because it's convenient, you know? If you can just be like, well, it's not wrong to me, then suddenly you have an argument against everything. But how far are you going to push that? Like, a murderer who is a psychopath isn't really thinking that they're doing the wrong thing. Is it fine for them then? You know, at what point does it end? So,
Mm-hmm. And the other day, on Monday, I think actually, Milo Yiannopoulos, and Steven Crowder, who I've never talked about, he's a conservative comedian that complains about the regressive left. I kind of just discovered him recently too. They were all at UMass up in Massachusetts, so they were giving a forum, and I watched it the other day, and it was really good. Usually, Milo's on this tour right now of going to different universities, and of course there's all these protesters that are disrupting them, but at this one, the entire time they were disrupting. Okay. And they didn't remove them. And when I say the entire time, like, they would be speaking and the protesters would just be yelling, and they'd have to just keep talking and talk over them. And it's like actually amazing that someone could yell for that long. And there's this certain like tone of like a yelling regressive, like, social justice warrior that's both irritating but beautiful at the same time.
How is it beautiful?
Just because they're so stupid with how easy their feelings are hurt. Like, the only things that they said that could have been represented as hateful were like some of the things they said about Islam I didn't agree with. In general, I agree with them that like we should be willing to criticize Islam, but they can go a little bit far. But like, they were still completely insane. So one of the things Christina Hoff Sommers brought up, which I think not enough people that talk about neo-feminism bring up, is like the validity of gender studies as a college major or a like pursuit in like the field of knowledge. She's saying essentially like in each field we have peer review, like even if it's outside of science, like there's a discussion, there's differing opinions. In science, there is debate to the extent that you have to have evidence, and if you don't have all the evidence, and there can be some leeway, people can debate on what's true or not. And then in like more social topics, there's debate. But in gender studies, there's like we want to say knowledge in all the fields. There's no agenda. It's all fact based. There's an agenda in gender studies, and because they're all radical feminists, there's no differing opinions, and it's not based on evidence. That's all these studies that come out. They take misrepresented idea. They have ideas that misrepresent the actual information that's in there. They're based on false studies. So it's annoying that it's called gender studies when it's really just people with opinions. There's no study in it. There's no fact or science in it. And I like to compare it to philosophy, because it's like, oh, well, philosophy is just people going back and forth. So you say, oh, well, what's the value in philosophy? Well, philosophy, people have differing opinions. There's nothing's based on evidence, and they acknowledge that. It's all, you're having debate. In philosophy, people learn how to have debates and arguments. So it's very productive. And I think the important distinction is people in the field of philosophy don't have immediate effects on politics. But people in gender studies have immediate effects, and they're causing all these problems. And essentially, like, these people that go into gender studies, they are told by the professors who have the same agenda. They're the radical feminists. They say things like women earn 77 cents on the dollar, not based on any facts. Economists have debunked it. It's led by a misrepresentation of studies that have been done. But anyone that disagrees with that is ostracized. They're not even allowed in the gender studies community. So there's no debate. It's just people having this agenda. And what happens is, because one of these big issues that they have is income inequality, they say women are earning less on the dollar. So where that actually comes from is the fact that people, men and women, choose different fields. So because men typically choose higher paying fields, there's a discrepancy. It's not an equal pay for equal work, which I love the term equal pay for equal work, because yes, I believe in equal pay for equal work. If a woman is an engineer, she'll make the same as a man who's an engineer. If a woman's an artist, she's not going to make the same as a man who's an engineer. It's just how it works. So these feminists want to complain about how much less they're making than men, but they go to, in order to complain about it, they go into gender studies, a field that isn't going to pay you anything. And then when you tell them, hey, you know you're not going to make as much money in gender studies, they complain about that. And it's like, well, do you want to choose something that you love or something that you're going to get paid for? I mean, maybe you love engineering, so then that's a win-win. But of course, being a feminist, you don't want a man telling you what to study. So I'm just going to say, study what you love. If you love studying gender studies, then go for it. But don't expect to make a lot of money from it.
And I think that's a part of society's expectations that is kind of sexist against men. Like, men are expected to provide for their families and expected to make enough money to do that. And so I feel like there's a lot more pressure on men to choose a job that will actually pay off, and for women to just do what fulfills them. And that's a really interesting thing to me. But something you said about how women are they choose professions that pay less.
Yeah.
Something that I've heard, and I don't know the credibility of this at all, but something that I hear a lot of feminists saying is that men are more likely to promote other men within their field, even if performance is the same. And that's a way that over time men can get paid more than women in their field. But something that just takes away credibility from gender studies for me is that, well, women's studies, is that you don't often see men taking the class or teaching the class,
Yeah.
which is a big deal for me. Like, when you take a world religions class, you're going to have a teacher who doesn't believe in every single one of those religions. They might be atheist, they might be Christian, they might be Muslim or Hindu or any of the religions, but they're not going to believe in all of them. And that, in a way, gives credibility to the class because they're going to approach the other religions from a standpoint of, like, not bias for that religion. You know, they're not going to be trying to convince you of anything. But in women's studies, it's usually a woman teaching the class. I have never heard of, well, I'm positive that out there is a man that's teaching women's studies, but I personally have never heard of anyone taking a women's studies class and it being taught by a man, and that kind of shows how rare it is, to me at least. And that might be a fallacy, but it's a good point, I think. And so that takes away credibility from the class, because if you have a woman teaching you women's studies, then obviously it's going to be biased towards women. And if a man taught women's studies, I think that it would allow a less biased approach to be taken to it. And because there are things to study in women's history, you know, about how women have been repressed in the past and how things are getting better and stuff.
But the men that do teach gender studies are like, they subscribe to all the same ideas. They're just as crazy as the female feminists. And like what I was trying to say before was, because there's no differing opinions, you can't deem it a knowledge-based field, because there's no differing opinions. They're essentially just a political action committee, and I really want to just take a gender studies class and just like play devil's advocate the whole time. And
they won't let you.
Yeah, and see, that's the thing. Like, you're not allowed to have a differing opinion. And one thing Christina Hoff Sommers is big on too is she wrote a book called The War on Boys, which is about, I might want to read it sometime. It seems really interesting, about all the things we do towards boys that we don't think about. Like, it's a big thing now. We're thinking about how we raise our daughters. I'm sure you know, recently Barbie is having like more diverse dolls and everything.
Oh yeah, different body sizes and skin colors.
That's a great thing. We're doing all these things to pay attention to how we're raising our daughters. We say, oh, we don't want this like science play kit to just be in the boys' toy section, because we want to encourage girls to explore science. It shouldn't just be a boys thing, which I agree with all that. So we're spending all this time paying attention to how we're raising our daughters, but we're not paying attention to how we're raising boys, and we're doing all these things to feminize boys. Now all the gender people out there are going to complain that I'm saying like we need to try to make our boys more masculine and everything, and it's like this goes into like the transgender part of the regressive left a lot too, is like they don't want us to encourage people to be, they don't want us to encourage kids to be of the gender that they were born. So it's like, let the kid do what they want. If they want to be a girl, be girly. If they want to do boy stuff, do boy stuff. But the problem is that she talks about in The War on Boys is all the things we're doing to boys that we don't realize are really harming them. Like one thing she brought up that a lot of people don't realize, women are earning most college degrees now.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody just would regularly realize that.
Interestingly enough, though, that's how it is in a lot of cultures. Like in Iran, even, women are earning more college degrees than men are, even though women have a lot of systematic sexism towards them in that society. They're still earning more degrees than men.
And there's all these things like boys just naturally have like a lot of energy. They're really aggressive and everything. So boys will be on the playground and they'll be roughhousing, and you need to make a distinction between like aggressive behavior and roughhousing. Like, we need to understand the importance of how children learn through play. Roughhousing and like boys messing around is how they socialize. It's kind of, I mean, when you talk about like how children develop and the way they play, it kind of reminds me of like how animals develop.
Yeah, I was about to say dogs fight each other.
Yeah, like lion cubs and dogs will like kind of wrestle with each other, and there's like a masculine socializing that goes on like that, and also like boys making fun of each other. Of course, you need to be careful because like boys can be sensitive to like making fun of each other, but there needs to be a serious understanding between what's bullying and what's like boys like playing with each other. Like if like boys that are friends with each other are making fun of each other, then it's like that's kind of socializing, but you know, you can tell when it's bullying. But then there's all these other things like people being insane with like thinking there's something wrong with boys. Like on Joe Rogan's podcast, he brought up an example, and this is just one. There's so many of like a boy who has an imaginary bow and arrow, and he's like shooting people with it, and like he got suspended, and he's like 6 years old. Like all these kids being suspended for these things that they see as violent. Like when I was little, we would play cops and robbers. Boys play like they have like make their fingers into a gun and like shoot each other imaginary. That's being eradicated because that's seen as too violent. And also Joe brought up an example of another boy who's like around 6 years old. He's drawing pictures of like pirates having sword fights, and then there's like arms being cut off and everything, and the teacher like called his parents in. He's like, I'm really concerned about the things your son is drawing. And the parents are just like, he likes pirates, and he's letting his imagination go, and you're censoring his imagination. And this is like really important. We always want to talk about like how we can foster the imagination of our children. And it's like when you see things that you think are violent. I have an example. When I was in 7th grade, we had to draw a picture of a World War I battlefield, and I had this really kind of violent scene. There was like there's a guy being shot through the neck by a sniper, and mustard gas everywhere, and people were suffocating. And I showed it to my teacher, Mrs. Marshak. She was a really cool lady, and she thought it was funny. And then one of the administrators was in there too, and I showed it to him, and he thought it was hilarious. And I'm not a terrible person now. So there's all these things that we do to boys, trying to censor what they're doing and feminizing them in a sense. And it's hurting the way they're socialized. And a lot of this is because we think boys are violent. We see like school shootings and everything, and we say, oh, we need to censor these drawings and the way kids play because it's leading to this. No, I think it's the opposite. I think when you don't allow them to socialize in that way, it draws them further apart from each other. They don't have that connection with other people. They aren't able to express themselves when they're young, and that just seems to build up, and when they're older they just seem to be aggressive.
I'm not 100% positive about this, but I'm pretty sure that I read, maybe it was in psychology class or maybe it was just online, that when people with violent disorders or something, there's two different basically schools of thought. And these aren't like psychological schools of thought, but they're schools of thought of society. Basically, some people believe that if you let a person have a way to vent this kind of thing, for instance, if someone had a issue with anger management or something, and they had some doll or something that they beat up instead of taking it out on people. Some people believe that that will cause them to over time get worse, and some people believe that it will allow them a different method to get rid of their urges, essentially. And this is more towards like sexual stuff than violence, but it's kind of the same premise. It's just some people believe that the more you do it, the worse it'll become, and other people believe that if you have a different outlet for it, then it won't affect you as much because you won't be keeping anything pent up inside, essentially. And that's kind of what I'm seeing here when you're talking about this, is that essentially if you tell boys that violence is bad, they're going to feel bad for wanting to just like rough around with their friends or something.
Mm-hmm.
And that can become dangerous, because when you internalize things like that and it gets all complicated and stuff, then it can outburst in things like school shootings and attacks and stuff. So just something that I think might be a reason for all of this stuff is, I don't want to sound sexist or anything, but a lot of teachers are women.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just might not understand, you know.
Yeah.
that boys are kind of like this. Like, boys are different than girls. They're violent and they're gross and they're weird and stuff. And so when they see something, it might shock them. And that's something that you can kind of see in how kids who grow up without strong father figures in their lives, boys that grow up without strong father figures are more likely to commit crimes and more likely to end up in prison and such. And that's why there's a lot of programs in inner cities to get kids doing stuff with like father figures, because a lot of inner city kids don't have fathers, just because that's a stereotype, but it's also true that it happens a lot where kids are just raised by their mothers. And so when basically kids go to school, it's the thing that they do for most of their day. And so if they're just surrounded by women all the time, if these boys are just surrounded by women all the time, it might have a similar effect. And I'm obviously just speculating here, but it might have a similar effect where they just don't feel like their normal feelings are all right, because from a woman's standpoint, they're not.
And something that she also brought up with Joe Rogan that goes into saying that gender studies is an knowledge, fact-based field. It's just it has an agenda. Is when we're talking about gender and how kids grow up and socialize and everything, something that fits their narrative is to refute the science of like having a gender when you're born. Like, there are people that believe that you're bisexual when you're born, and there are people that believe you don't really have a gender when you're born. So they refute all the evidence that we have of there being a biological basis for gender. And in saying it, all of this, I'm not saying you can't be transgender. I'm saying you can't dismiss that there's biological reasons for gender. So boys have testosterone that leads to, it's not just physical properties of being a boy. There's psychological and social properties to having testosterone. Like having testosterone, it's a hormone. It's physical at the deepest level, but then the physical and biological effect of testosterone leads to psychological effects, and psychological effects lead to social effects. So there's a biological basis for gender, but that doesn't fit the feminist narrative. So we're gonna completely refute that and just say, oh, you have no gender when you're born, and it's all created by how you socialize, and by not allowing boys to socialize in the way that boys do, they aren't comfortable with being boys when they get older. They aren't comfortable with being men, and that's something that I think she and a lot of people like us are concerned about. Is we spend a lot of time talking about, like women's image of themselves with like body image and like women being oppressed and everything, which is legitimate, and I'm a big supporter of helping our young girls have a safe personal image. But we have to think about the boys too, because if we feminize them so much, then they don't know what it is to be a man anymore, and they're not comfortable with themselves as men.
And going back to what you were talking about with hormones, something interesting that I read is testimonies from men that, I forget the term, but transgendered women, essentially.
Yeah.
They went from man to woman.
Mm-hmm.
Something interesting that I read in personal testimonies is they said that they felt more in touch with other people's emotions once they started taking estrogen.
Yeah.
Which is a common thing. Like, you hear about women having like signals to each other about like, oh, I'm in danger and stuff. And women always seem to have that ability to like pick up on your emotions. Like, a funny example is like your mom always knows when something is wrong,
Yeah, that's funny though, because my mom always thinks something's wrong when nothing's wrong. But
exactly.
No, I know what you mean.
Because women have different ways to interpret body image, just what you say and how you're acting. Women have different ways to interpret that. If you're being quiet to a woman, that means like, oh, something's wrong. They're quiet. They're stuck within themselves. They're thinking about something. That means something's wrong. And so, but yeah, they just said that they developed like this sixth sixth sense almost, where they could sense other people's emotions a lot better. And I think that's really interesting, and it just shows how hormones don't just change physical appearance, but the mind works in different ways for the genders.
Mm-hmm. And just all these myths that want to be debunked, like the wage gap. Okay, this is another example of refuting what's actually been researched. They seem to think that because so many politicians keep repeating the 70 cents on the dollar, there's some more validity to it. It's like every time a politician mentions it, it almost seems more true to them. Like if you go on Hillary Clinton's Twitter, I swear, like every other thing is about the gender wage gap. So they seem to think that it can't possibly be false if politicians just keep repeating it.
That's the thing, though. If you keep on saying it, people are going to believe it, essentially.
Yeah, our 6th episode, which we scrapped because there was just too much interruptions in it. There was actually some good stuff in there because I was talking about a book I read recently called The Political Brain by Drew Weston. And he's talking about how Democrats have been losing over the past 30 years, and there's a reason for it because they think people respond to evidence and facts, and that's why we always act like, oh, the left has all the facts. The Republicans are so stupid, but they don't understand that on a conscious level you might respond to facts, but on the subconscious level, which is the more important level for forming your political beliefs, the Republicans definitely win that fight. And he's a Democrat himself, so the whole idea of the book is he wants to tell Democrats how they need to do better with this. But this is one example where the Democrats actually have it right in the sense that they win votes that way, but it's not truthful, is that the 77 cents to the dollar is completely devoid of fact, but they keep repeating it, and it becomes true to people.
And that's a way to corner that women's vote, because women are statistically more likely to vote for the Democratic Party, and they want to keep it that way, so they'll keep on repeating it, because no one says that you have to tell the truth in politics. I mean, people will call you out, but if you make the statement first, like we've said before in this podcast, whatever is said first is going to permeate in someone's mind, even when people are trying to prove it wrong.
Mm-hmm. That's an important point in his book, actually, too, is a reason Democrats have been failing is because they don't address Republicans when they completely misrepresent their arguments. If you let people define what you are and you don't refute it, not refute, but like you don't point out that they're wrong, then you're letting them label you. The reason liberal has a dirty connotation is because Republicans have branded it that way. Branding is an important word he used a lot. Branding. The Republicans have a brand. They have a narrative. That's another word he used a lot. They have a brand. They have a narrative. Democrats don't have that. So atheist has a dirty connotation because the Republicans have painted it that way. Christian and God have good connotations because they've painted it that way. It's the same with all other words. Socialism obviously has some terrible things with it, but anyone that thinks we should increase taxes on the rich is considered a socialist. So it's things like that. Like of course the right has their policing in that way too. If I believe in same-sex marriage, then I'm instantly anti-God. I don't know how you make that connection because most Democrats that support same-sex marriage are Christians, but the right has been able to do that, and the left isn't able to refute it. So of course I spend most of my time talking about the left, although I have just as much to say about the right. But they both have these pockets of being able to brand people for what they aren't. Like, the left is able to call people racist that aren't actually racist.
Yeah.
And the left is able to call people anti-God who are just as Christian as they are.
Something that I really liked when I watched one of the debates is that Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders both tried to make the distinction between Islam and Islamist, which I think is very important because Islam is a valid religion that most most Muslim people, I always make that mistake, but most Muslim people will be good for the most part. But Islamist is a political view where you're using the idea of Islam to have a anti-West standpoint. And I thought it was very important that they made that distinction because right now I see that that distinction is not being made a lot on the right. And I think that's very dangerous to everywhere in the world because when you start branding one religion as bad, it's going to have some really bad consequences. It's never a good idea to alienate a minority because bad things can happen. And that's exactly what happened in the Middle East, is that we basically alienated them from their own society by trying to take control and always coming in there and disrupting them. So they developed a hatred for us, and that's just what's permeating over time.
That's definitely something important that Democrats need to do more is make those distinctions that, Democrats are being accused of sympathizing with radical Muslims, and you have to say, no, we're criticizing Islamists, which are people that believe that Islam should be the one world religion, and its beliefs, especially some of its worst beliefs that American Muslims don't agree with, should dominate. So it's funny because when Republicans say the president has not said the words Islamic terrorism, radical Islam, I think a lot of Democrats would agree, like saying, the sane Democrats would say, yeah, saying radical Islam isn't racist or anything, but the Republicans have painted it as being a racist statement. The same thing with All Lives Matter. Saying All Lives Matter, of course, isn't like a racist thing, but because it's seen as the opposition to Black Lives Matter, it's seen as racist. Yeah. And because when you say All Lives Matter, you're showing that you aren't addressing the gripes that Black people have with the way our justice system is run in the country. So it's easy to see that saying All Lives Matter isn't the best thing for you to do because you should be willing to help minorities not be shot in the street. But it's kind of sad that saying all lives matter is seen as a terrible thing, but you have to understand that it's because you're not addressing people that should be helped. Milo brought up something interesting at the UMass forum, which he brings up all the time actually, is that the reason the regressive left is getting so out of control is because there's not enough racists left, there's not enough sexist left, and all the other branches of the regressive left to satisfy these people, so they have to create racist and sexist. Like, I'm sure someone on the regressive left, for even questioning any of this stuff, would call me a racist and a sexist. I'm not a racist and a sexist, but they have to create more of them. They have to broaden what being a racist and a sexist is, just so they still have something to complain about.
Yeah, they need an enemy so that they can consolidate their power.
Yeah, because especially with gender studies, if women end up being completely equal, they won't have jobs anymore. They already barely have jobs because it's not a valuable thing. And they never think about, it's all about supply and demand. The demand for gender studies graduates is very low, and the supply for them is extremely high. So what jobs there are that pay very little in the field of gender studies, they don't get them.
I don't even know what kind of jobs a gender studies major would get.
Probably advocacy groups.
Yeah.
Which just shows further that they have an agenda. But it's and I said supply and demand, that's economics, but obviously they don't care about economics because they don't, in all the myths they fabricate, they've been debunked by economists and their perverse interpretations of a study that's been done that wasn't a good study. So if you get something from this podcast, it's today's feminism is completely devoid of facts.
I think it's third generation feminism we're on at this point, but
Yeah.
man, I miss the good old days. Anyways, we're gonna have to wrap it up there. Thank you all for listening, and have a good day, night, or whatever. We don't have anything really to say except Eric has a blog.
Yeah, Babbling Idiot blog. Type it all one word. It's going to be the only thing that comes up, and if you click on it and you see my face, then you're there and you can read stuff on there. I try to post at least once a week.
Thank you for listening, and yeah, goodbye.